online temples too. A big component of a lot of Hindu temples are doing fire ceremonies. And fire ceremonies there's a god of fire named Agni, and so there's these fire ceremonies. And I got to wondering about, why the fire ceremonies? What's the deal about the fire ceremonies? Other than that, it's very typical fires related to sacrifice. You see this in many cultures around the world. But what is the specific Hindu context for fire ceremonies? And it's very interesting, and it actually leads us into talking about the Hindu conceptions of the body, and also as a relationship to Hindu medicine. And medicine that grew out of the Hindu tradition is called Ayurvedic medicine. Ayurvedic. I'm not going to spell that for you because I'll get it wrong, but it sounds a little bit like it's spelled. Ayurvedic medicine. Ayurvedic medicine is a type of medicine derived from Hinduism that is an energy medicine. Energy medicine. It looks at the body as having certain kinds of energy and energy flowing in the body, and this relates to the fire ceremony. Okay? And some of you guys may know a little bit about Chinese medicine. You've got qi running through meridians, and acupuncture stick needles in there to open those up, and you're going to get all that on the last class of this semester, because my friend Julie is going to come in and demonstrate acupuncture and Chinese medicine to you, talk about it. And the Ayurvedic system is very similar. The idea that you have energy in the body, prana, and it goes through certain channels, and in these channels there are certain points called nadis, and this is where the energy goes, and those things get blocked, and you need certain techniques to open those up, and then that helps the person become healthy. But there's also a spiritual component to this medical system, in that in those energy channels, in those points along the energy channel, these nadis, it is thought that the nadis are where God or gods come into you. That is where, when you are being spiritual, your spirituality comes from the fact that there's a divine spark in these nadis. Okay? And the energy in the body, prana, it basically means breath. Okay, it means breath. But also, the energy in the body is likened to fire. That your body has a certain kind of fiery energy. And of course, this is roughly, we know now roughly this is true. Our nervous system run on electrical energy, or electrochemical energy. We know that. But back in the day, they characterized this as a kind of a fire energy. And then there are points along those energy things where the divine comes through to you. So the divine comes through to you via this fire energy. Well, remember that we're all living in the Kali Yuga, right? The Dark Ages, things were all decadent. Things aren't going too well for us. We're not able to meditate. We're not able to turn our mind to spiritual things. And so in this age, also the nadis, the energy in our bodies and the nadis are very weak. And so the divine doesn't come into us as much. We're not as spiritual as we were in past ages because our energy system is very, very, very weak, and the nadis are very weak. And because of that, God or the gods can't come through to us through that. So what Hindus did is something, in a way, it's sort of eminently practical. They said, well, how can we know that God comes to us through fire. How can, the fire in our bodies, how can we enhance that? Well, what if we had an external fire? And we brought God into that external fire, and we were there in the ritual experiencing that. Then the God could go to the external fire, which is very strong, and then from that, then enter into our nadis, enter into our energy system, and strengthen that. Give us more energy, come to us, give us more spirituality. And that is what the fire ritual is for. That's why you see so many fire rituals. And again, if you go to the temple in Malibu, you'll see that they have these ritual places where they do these fire ceremonies, and they offer things to the fire. Now, in mainstream Hinduism, there's vegetarian offerings, and usually they use ghee, which is clarified butter. And we also noticed while we were at the temple, they had a big thing of canola oil there that they poured on it. This is to get the fire going, and then they have the various offerings into the fire. And again, this is to bring God to the fire, and then it allows God or the divine then to come into your own sort of energy system in your body. So I thought that was very cool. We saw a little bit of that. Yes?
What was with the coconuts?
The coconuts are also part of the offering. There's offering coconuts, fruit. This is called prasad. You give an offering of fruit to the gods. and then the gods like that offering, and then they bless it, and then at the end of the ceremony, you pass all the blessed food out, and everybody eats of it, and they get a little bit of the mojo from I'm using this Hindu term mojo. They get a little of the energy from the gods or the goddesses. They get to take that in. And that's very typical. And so because mainstream Hinduism, they're vegetarian, they're giving vegetarian offerings. Coconuts, fruit, things like that. And you see that out there. Now the coconuts you're seeing because the shell gets left, right? So it's not the other stuff, kind of gets rotted or gets eaten, but the coconut leaves the shell. So when you go and see these things in the previous offerings, the shell has been left there, and you see that there. But there was other stuff there too. Sometimes you'll see banana peels or stuff. Usually they clean it up. You'll see that stuff too. Okay. Now, there's a bunch of different kinds of ceremonies they do there. A bunch of these are fire offering kinds of things, and you can actually go to the Hindu temple and you can sponsor some of these offerings. You can pay a couple $100, $150, I can't remember what it is, and you can sponsor these things, and they're happy to do it for you. And then even kind of symbolically, you can be good for you, good for your karma, good for your health. And people do this, and there's a number of these things. A lot of the ceremonies they do are around rites of passage, and so birth, giving a child a name, first day of school, I don't know, marriage, reaching your 50th birthday, reach our 60th birthday. There's a couple of them reaching your 80th birthday. There's a bunch of these rites of passage that they do these ceremonies on. In fact, at the Malibu temple, I think somebody said that Britney Spears went there and gave money to do a ceremony for her son when he was born or something, because she lives right near there. So, so again, people do this kind of stuff. If you go there on the weekend, or you go there, even during the week when we're there, sometimes there's people doing rituals and things down there. They've sponsored the ritual. They've paid a certain amount of money, and then the Brahmin priests conduct the ritual, and that's a good thing for people. So if you feel like you want to give yourself a nice birthday present, you can go spend $150 and have the priest do a ritual for you. Go down there and pay them. They'd be happy to probably do that for you. All right, let's try this again. Touch to start. Everything's cooled down. Turn on projector. Yes. Turn on computer. I don't know if I did that in the right order. Hope this works. I see light. Projectors are lighting up. That's a good sign. Windows is not doing well. Let's see if this works. Okay, looks like we're going to get something here. Good. All right. So last time we talked a bit about the gods. We talked about Brahma, right? And I'm just reminding myself, because I know I talked about some stuff at the temple, and I talked about some stuff here, and I want to make sure that I get everything to everybody. So I talked to you guys about Brahma, right? And I talked to you about why Brahma is kind of a pariah among the gods, right? He did a bad thing. He may have had a sexual relationship with his own daughter. Again, in Hinduism, we want to think beyond the literal, and we want to think to the symbolic. Okay, and the symbolism of that is that that the divine, Brahma, enters into matter, which is represented by the daughter, the female, and from that, human beings are born. One of the creation myths of Hinduism is that all human beings are descended from Brahma and his daughter, and therefore we all have a little bit of that divine spark. We have matter, the earth, but we also have that divine spark. Okay? But again, this is yet another myth of incest, right? Because we have Oedipus in the West, right, where the young man inadvertently marries and has sex with his mother. And here you have in Hinduism, Brahma, the father, having sex with the daughter. So this weird thing about, it's funny, you start looking around in different societies and you see all these incest myths. It's very interesting. And there's more of them, by the way. And then if you take my other class on Fridays in the spring, the bizarre behavior class, I'll talk to you about that there's also, interestingly enough, a lot of myths about castration. Oedipus isn't, Oedipus, the castration is symbolic, but there's actually plenty of myths out there in the world where the castration is actually more literal. And I'll talk about some of those as well. I'll talk about the history of castration, which is really interesting. But this incest stuff is really common. We see this all the time. All right. Where am I? It's here somewhere. One of these things. Which one is it? And that's what we're going to get to. And this is the one we're going to talk about. So I talked about Brahma. I talked, and you guys all know that Brahma is not much worshipped, right? He's not that popular. There's only something like 4 Brahma temples in all of India. And he has 4 heads because he got one cut off for being bad, right? Head cut off, castration symbolism, okay? So again, very common mythological theme. Okay? Brahma rises from Vishnu's navel in a lotus, and he dreams the universe. And we get to Shiva. I didn't talk about Shiva yet, did I? I think this is where we're left off. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about Shiva. Oh, wait a minute. I talked about Vishnu, right? Did I talk about Vishnu? No Vishnu, no Shiva. Okay, so we're going to talk about Vishnu and Shiva. Really, I had the slides in the wrong order. We should technically be talking about probably Vishnu first. Vishnu is the maintainer god, and Shiva is the destroyer. Okay? Shiva is the destroyer. However, Shiva has a lot of other characteristics. He's a very interesting guy. He is often shown in this posture here as the god of meditation. I actually have notes here. I can actually read my notes. And generally, if you had to rank these gods as sort of in their popularity, Vishnu would be number 1. Vishnu and Vishnu's incarnations are number 1. Shiva's kind of number 2. And then Brahma is a distant third. Yeah, actually 4th. I would actually say it's probably more like Vishnu and Shiva and his son Ganesh are probably roughly equally popular. And then you've got Brahma, a distant 4th.
What about Kali?
Who?
Kali?
I'm going to talk about Kali. We're going to talk about the goddesses specifically. Okay. The goddesses are also popular, and Brahma's wife / possibly daughter also popular. We'll talk about her too. Okay. So Vishnu typically is depicted like this, naked. He's sitting on a tiger rug. He has his body is usually this sort of bluish color, but it's really what it is. It's like ashes rubbed all over. And in other depictions, he's completely naked and he's rubbed in ash. And this symbolizes 2 things. First, his nakedness symbolizes that he represents the naked face of reality, coming to an experience of the naked reality, the true reality in its naked, pure form. Okay, and this is when you see Shiva naked. This is what this stands for. And then again, the ash that's rubbed all over him is ash from a funeral pyre, and this represents again the mortality of humans, or in the case of Shiva, the idea of death. That death is important, that death is part of the cycle of life and death. Death is very important to keep the cycles going. And Shiva is the god of destruction. Okay, so he has some aspect of that. Okay. Now, an interesting thing about Shiva also that you sometimes see is Shiva is in the pose of the Shiva Nataranja. And this is this pose you see Shiva, it looks like this. It's like this. Okay. And this is a very interesting pose. And sometimes in his hand here, he's holding a little stick which has a drum on the end, and the drum has the drum heads facing out, 2 drum heads facing out, and there's a little string with a ball on the end. And what happens is you turn this thing, and the ball whips around, hits the drum, and you turn it again, and it whips around and hits the other one. And this drum is called the Damaru. And Shiva is sitting there in posture with the Damaru, and he's doing this, and the drum's going back and forth, bump, bump, bump. And that drum represents, the beat of that drum represents time. It represents sort of counting out the beat, counting out the time of of this of these yugas, of these ages. And why would time be related to a god of destruction? Well, you can think about this. You're all pretty young, so maybe you're not thinking about it yet, but you will as you get older. Is that time is the great destroyer, right? Time is, time takes care of everything eventually, right? I mean, yeah, you have Joe Pesci and Scarface taking care of business with an ice pick, right? But, if you wait long enough, time will, basically assassinate everybody, right? Everything, time, so you're just counting down to destruction. So this is what Shiva's doing in this dancing posture. This dancing posture is very interesting, by the way, because later on in the history, we'll talk about this in my other class, the history of martial arts, what happens is this posture, this thing gets, eventually from India goes to China and Japan and other places, and it gets taken up by Buddhism. And so what you'll see in a lot of the Buddhist temples is you'll have these guardian figures doing this in front of the guardian, in front of the temples, right? And these are warrior figures that are guarding the temple. And this, the oldest versions of this come from Hinduism, and they get sort of adopted by Buddhism, and they get moved to China and to Japan and other parts of Asia. And so when we talk about Buddhism, we can talk a little bit about that. That's coming later. Okay? Shiva is often in meditation. In fact, he is considered to be the god of meditation, the god of meditators. Shiva likes to meditate quite a bit. And he does not like being interrupted in his meditations. And if you go around and you clumsily waltz around him and stumble into things and make noise while he's meditation, sometimes the third eye will open up, and then he'll get really pissed off and just zap you, just like a disintegration ray, poof, poof. Don't piss me off while I'm meditating. Don't get me out of my meditation. So we have lots of stories about Shiva's meditating and how that sometimes creates a little trouble, and I'll tell you one of those stories in a little bit. He also is depicted with these snakes around him, usually these cobras, and these cobras have various symbolism. Sometimes there's a cobra over him, covering him, protecting him, and the cobras represent also the Naga. The Naga are like these beings, supernatural, semi-divine beings, these Naga, kind of like the snake people. Anybody here Irish? I mean, really Irish? Got a little real Irish in you, you know about the leprechauns. Leprechauns aren't the things on the box of Lucky Charms. Leprechauns are like these beings that exist. And sometimes, every once in a while, the humans can stumble across them and get a pot of gold. But a lot of times, the leprechauns cause trouble. They kind of mess with you, and they're a little bit capricious. They can kind of mess with you and cause trouble, and they can be a little bit trickster-like. And sometimes they can take advantage of human folly, especially things like greed, and lead humans into very bad places. They play jokes on people with really mean, cruel things. The Nagas are very similar. They're very similar. Generally considered to be, relatively beneficial, but you don't really want to run into them because you don't know. Maybe they're in a mood this week and they're going to do some weird, prank on you. And so you kind of like, a lot of respect, leave them alone. Don't really want to interact with them too much. And if you think about it, there's a lot of snakes in India. There's a lot of cobras and things like this. And again, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because the snakes are kind of like this in India. You don't want to get rid of them because they go around, they eat all the rats, they eat all the pests, they eat the things that are going to go and eat your plants and your crops. And so they're useful to have around, but you don't really want to get near them because they're really dangerous, right? They can bite you, they have poison. And so, again, in some ways, it sort of represents a sort of, archetypal attitude towards snakes in India. But again, Shiva, these snakes are sort of, the Naga, they're sort of devoted to Shiva, they take care of him. The other thing you see in Shiva here is a couple things. I should get my pointer out here. A couple things that we can notice. Notice this symbol here, the trident. Oh, by the way, here's the damaru, the little drum I was mentioning to you. Notice the trident here. This is another typical thing that you see that represents Shiva, this trident. Okay, three-pronged thing on a stick. And we know this from Greek mythology, right? Who in Greek mythology walks around with a trident? right? Poseidon or Neptune or Poseidon, right? He has a trident. Well, is there a relationship between Shiva and Poseidon, Neptune? Possibly. Okay? Again, there was trade going on. It wasn't like India was this completely isolated place from the rest of the world. There were trade routes. There's a lot of speculation about people going into the Middle East and trading. And of course, the Greek civilization almost extended down to India. Alexander the Great almost went into India and started conquering things, in India proper, what we think of India now. He actually got into, I think, as far as maybe Afghanistan. Somebody probably correct me on this, but he got pretty far close to India. So there was certain exchange of ideas that went on. We see this in things like Greek medicine, where it really there seems to be some similarity to Ayurvedic medicine in India and maybe Chinese medicine. So we know that ideas were exchanged.
Was that Silk Road era?
The Silk Road, or other roads, going. Silk Road would have been China, but there are other routes into India through what is now Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan. So we know that there was interchange of ideas. Other things you see about Shiva. Notice his hair is, you can't really see it too clearly in here, but it's done up in this sort of dreadlocks. We'll talk about that when we see the sadhus who emulate Shiva. We'll also see this thing over here in the back. This is the Shiva lingam. I'll talk about this in a minute. And the other thing that's very interesting about Shiva is these marks on his throat here. These three marks. Sometimes they're shown on the forehead too, but here on the throat. And this is a story about Shiva, which is really quite interesting. The gods get together at one point and decide that if they turn the Milky Way, they churn it, like churning butter. You guys ever seen butter churned in the old days? There's a wood thing, and you put the milk in it, and you got this thing, and you just continually move it around, and then eventually the milk separates and the oil comes out, and you get the butter from it, right? Now, butter is very important in India, as our cow products are very important. One of the reasons why cows are sacred is because a living cow is so much more useful than just taking a cow and killing it and having a nice steak dinner. You keep the cow alive, you can get milk, you can get dung. The dung is used typically, you take cow dung and you plaster it on the side of a wall somewhere where it's hot, and then it dries out, and then the cow dung is actually used for fuel. You can actually burn it, use it for fires. Cow pee is used as a medicine. There's lots of uses for the cow, and of course milk is really important. And so again, milk products, things like butter, are very important. And in India, they take the butter and then they allow the solids of the butter to settle out, and they take the clarified butter off the top, and that's called ghee, G-H-E-E. And ghee is used in everything, and the reason you get rid of those solids is the butter keeps longer. It takes longer to go rancid. You can actually keep it at room temperature for a while. Okay. So this idea of churning things, churning milk and getting things out of it was, is sort of steeped into Hindu tradition. And so the gods look at the Milky Way, up in the stars, and they go, hey, that looks like milk. We should churn it, and we'll get good stuff out of it. It'll be great. But they can't do it all alone. They're not strong enough to churn the Milky Way by themselves. So they go to the demons, the Rakasha, the demons. And they say, look, we know that you're our enemies, we're enemies, but let's have a truce, and if we work together, we can churn the Milky Way and we can get all the good stuff. Okay? Especially the thing we want to get out of it is we want to get the nectar of immortality. That's a really good thing to have. So the demons agree to this, and you can think of the gods are represented by the stars above the equator, and the demons by the stars below the equator. And again, if you watch the Earth moving around, what happens is the stars sort of shift, during the seasons, because of the wobble of the Earth, and the shifting is thought to represent that churning, right? So you have the gods on one side. Imagine there's a churn in the middle, and they attach a rope to it, and the gods are pulling on what they pull this way, and then the demons pull the other way, and they go back and forth and churn this thing. And the rope is actually is it a snake god? I'm trying to remember. There's a rope in the middle. The Vasuki, the serpent, serves as the rope, and the churn is the base of this great mountain, the great mountain Meru, which is supposedly in this ocean of milk, and they start churning. And for thousands of years, they churn this thing back and forth, okay? And as they're churning the Milky Way, amazing things come out. Okay? All sorts of amazing things come out of this churning process. You get all sorts of stuff. You get magic jewels, magic horses, and finally, the end of this, the nectar of immortality comes out of this. Okay? This is great. Everybody wants the nectar of immortality. But because there's always a balance to things, right? Not only does the nectar of immortality come out, but its opposite, which is the most virulent, horrible poison, also comes out. And so you've got these two things. You've got the nectar of immortality, which you've got this horrible, virulent poison. Okay? And of course, immediately as the nectar comes out, the gods and the demons begin to fight over the nectar of immortality. And finally, Vishnu gets involved in being a very powerful god and being very pure-hearted. He helps, and the gods vanquish the demons and get the nectar of immortality to drink, and they sort of win the day. But at the same time, what's left over is this poison. Yikes, this poison is really terrible. Imagine the most horrible, virulent poison. I mean, I think of it like radioactivity, right? It's kind of, what do? We have nuclear power, we get this wonderful power, it's really great, but the price we pay is that we have this horrible, nuclear radioactive waste which lasts thousands of years and is very dangerous. How do we deal with it, right? Well, we're not gods, so we haven't figured out a way to deal with our radioactive waste really well yet, but the gods figure there's got to be something we can do with this poison. And so finally they say, we got to call up somebody who's really badass and strong. So we'll call Shiva. And Shiva's called in. He's thought to be strong enough to deal with the poison, and he drinks the poison and uses his yogic powers to hold the poison in his throat. Because if he swallows it, that may be the end of him, but he can hold it in his throat with the yogic powers. And the poison's burning. It's like, imagine this horrible radioactive poison, and that's what you see these marks on the throat here. That represents the poison there, burning his throat, holding his throat. And what does he do? Well, this is bad because Shiva drinks the poison and thinks he can handle it, but he realizes that he can't. And he actually can't really deal with it, so what happens is he falls unconscious. And who is to save Shiva from this poison? This thing's really, really bad. So what happens is, his consort, Parvati, sees him, and she then takes on the form, a wrathful form. Because, again, remember I mentioned Kali is the one who gets things done. Female energy is the active energy, the male energy is passive. So Parvati takes on the form of Kali, and what Kali does, Shiva then is transformed into a baby. Okay? Or she sees him as a baby, and her maternal instincts kick in, and she decides then, in the public, right, not hiding this, because this is a terrible thing that happens here, she breastfeeds him. She breastfeeds him. Okay? And her milk is the antidote to the poison. Mother's milk is the antidote to the poison. And he takes in the mother's milk, neutralizes the poison, and then he's okay. Okay? So, what does this tell you? This tells you even though the strongest guy can get in there and very heroically drink the poison, hold it in, he can't deal with it, the strongest thing in the universe, of course, is the love of your mother. And again, expressed in milk. Right? So milk, a very important part of this tradition. Okay? So Shiva recovers, but he's got these scars on his throat from the poison, and so when you see him depicted, this is always there. All right. Okay, and so this is a picture. Here you go. This is Parvati here. Turns into Kali, breastfeeds Shiva. I guess he's a big baby here, and then he gets better. Shiva is sometimes depicted as in a hermaphroditic form, as half male and half female. And this is a very typical thing. You see this here. So remember I talked about Jungian psychology, right? Remember I talked about Jung a couple weeks ago? And what archetype did I talk about that reminds you of this? The anima, the animus. Okay, the anima, the animus. That every male has a female part, and every female has a male part. Okay, that we have the energy of both genders in each of us. Okay, and again, in my mind, this hermaphroditic depiction of Shiva represents this. And you'll see lots of these very interesting hermaphroditic Shiva statues all around. There's lots of different versions of this. And it also, to some degree, represents an equality of the energy, that male or female energies are equal. They're both equal. It's not like the male energy is better or the female's energy is better. They're different. They manifest differently, but they're both equal. Okay? Again, the male energy manifests more passively. The female energy manifests more actively. We'll see that when we get to the goddesses. Okay. Shiva is also depicted in this form. We saw a picture of this before in the picture of Shiva. This is a lingam. It's more correctly, it's a lingam. This part, which is the yoni. And these are, again, remember I talked about Freud and Freudian dreams and the manifest and the latent content, right? The manifest content, the latent content is disguised, okay? Symbolism is disguised. So, Freud is all about sex, right? So for Freud, the typical thing is sex. The manifest content is going to be a key and a lock, right? That represents sexual intercourse, right? A little bit similar here, except that the disguise is really barely disguised. You have the lingam here, which represents the penis, and you have the yoni here, which represents the vagina, and these two things are here together, representing, of course, the energies coming together. If you want to think about it in Freudian terms, this is eros. Together, if you want to think about it in Hindu terms, you have male energy and the female energy sort of manifesting together. And so this is common here. You'll see these, sometimes the lingam by itself, sometimes the lingam with the yoni. And this, if you go to a village in India, you will see this out in the middle of the village, and people will come and they will put all sorts of offerings to the lingam. They will put flowers around it. They'll put this red paste on it. They will worship this. Okay? And so again, it's not that they're worshiping a penis, literally a penis. They are worshiping this energy. Okay, this coming together of these energies. And here's a version from India, a bigger version. You can see it, and you leave offering flowers there to this. So when you see this is a version of people are doing homage to Shiva here. Another one. There's the most famous one that you know about, because you probably saw this movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? So they made one up. Temple of Doom. They made one up, and here you go. You got a nice Shiva lingam here. They didn't get the yoni quite right, but that's okay. They made a lingam up here, and this becomes the thing that they're running around and stealing and everything. They added some Hollywood stuff to it. The skulls at the base, that's very Hollywood. You wouldn't see that normally.
Temple of Doom, pyramid?
What's that?
Temple of Doom, pyramid?
Temple of Doom, yeah. Second one, right? Second one.
Pyramid.
Hero Mel, definitely Hero Mel, without a doubt. All right. So we can also talk about start talking about the goddesses now, and I talked to you a little bit about Sarasvati, Brahma's consort, and that how she could have possibly been his daughter in some of the myths. But we can talk about her in specifically. And she is thought to be sort of the muse. She's the muse of creativity, right? She's somebody. She's also thought to be the oldest goddess, because Brahma's, very old. And she's often mentioned in the Vedas and is widely worshipped. People like her. So they don't like Brahma. They don't like her dad/husband, but they do like her. And so she is very popular. She's also the patron, sort of the patron saint of creativity, of creative people, of musicians, of artists, of writers. She is the one that people sort of, use her for inspiration. She inspires them. Okay? And before performance, sometimes the musicians will prostrate themselves before their instrument and pray, and she'll be the one that they're praying to. They're praying that they give a good performance, that their creativity comes through, and that they're divinely inspired. They go to her. She's also the goddess of knowledge, and she helps school children and speakers invite her to dance on their tongue before a lecture. So before I come to lecture, you guys want to give a lecture. So I say, please, Sarasvati, come and dance on my tongue, so that my words come out and that you're able to learn from what I have to say, right? So she's also sort of the goddess of professors who profess for a living and talk, and she helps us to give a good lecture, hopefully. She's usually dressed in white, which is the color of pure illumination, shown with 4 hands. I have another picture of her holding a book of knowledge sometimes. She has a rosary showing her mastery over spiritual knowledge. Her other 2 hands, she's holding this kind of guitar-like instrument. It's called a veena. And actually, the veena probably is the precursor in a if you go the long lineage back and far enough, the veena probably is actually the precursor of the guitar. Okay? The veena is a very ancient Indian instrument. You guys know its more modern version, which is called the sitar. It's likely the sitar moved up to places, was adopted to places somewhere like Persia and what is now Iraq in the Middle East. And then later on, that sort of morphed into some other instruments, including some Turkish instruments. And then later on, that came to Europe and was changed around and eventually became the guitar. Okay. So every time you hear some guitar music, you can always think of Sarasvati as the muse. So it's a typical kind of depiction of her. All right. And again, the veena creates this primordial sound from which the universe was created. So again, a lot of times you'll hear in Indian music, there's a drone in the background. And then the melody, everything is on top of that. That drone can represent the primordial sound of the universe, which comes from the mantra, the sacred word Om, right? Om, which is usually you can sort of pronounce it in 3 ways, A-U-M, Om. Om. So you guys, everybody gone to yoga class and done some Oms after yoga class? That's what you're doing. You are basically sounding the primordial sound of the universe. You're connecting yourself with the primordial sound of the universe to connect yourself to sort of more spiritual plane. Right? That's the idea behind this. And again, Sarasvati, the instrument, represents that sound, and this is also one of the reasons why in Indian music, most Indian music has a drone in the background. And this, again, the spiritual reason for that. And I gave you guys on the Blackboard site, there is a whole lecture by Dr. Lucas on Indian music, and there is a bunch of examples of Indian music there in the Blackboard site. So I encourage you to listen to that stuff, check it out, see what you think. It's pretty interesting. Indian music is a whole other thing. If we had time, I'd love to go into that, but we're not going to have time this semester. Okay, so that is Sarasvati. Did I skip Vishnu?
Yeah.
Where is Vishnu in here? I gotta get back to Vishnu. Oh, where is he? He's missing. Oh my God. All right, I'm gonna go back so I can talk about Vishnu. Sorry about that. I think a slide must have got dropped from here somehow. Okay, so I'm gonna go talk about this guy Vishnu now. Sorry about that. I don't know why he's not here. Huh? We'll just show him here. This is him here too. Talk a little bit about Vishnu. So we talked about Brahma, Sarasvati, talked about Shiva. I'm going to get to Parvati in a minute and go more detail about her. Let's talk about Vishnu. Vishnu is the maintainer god, and Vishnu is also very, very popular, and lots of Vishnu temples all over the place around the world. And again, when you go down to Malibu, the temple down there, the main temple complex is devoted to Vishnu, and the bottom one is devoted to Shiva. So again, a lot of times you'll see Shiva and Vishnu both in the same temple, but Vishnu is very, very popular. And Vishnu has a number of very popular incarnations. He is thought to be the guy who sort of is the guide for being a human being. Okay? He's the guide for being a human being. how do you live your life as a human, right? Vishnu provides a model for that, as does his wife, his consort Lakshmi. They become the model of how to sort of be human, right? And so Vishnu is represented in a number of incarnations, and we're not going to go into all of them. There's like 10 of them. But I'll just talk to you about a couple of these incarnations. He incarnates sometimes as a human, and one of the most famous incarnations of Vishnu is as Rama. And there's a whole story about Rama called the Ramayana, and this is one of the most popular literary works in Hinduism, and it's even turned into a play called the Ramayana, and people put this play on every year, and it tells a story about Vishnu who incarnates as Rama, and Lakshmi, who incarnates as his wife Sita. Okay, and they're human beings. They're these very high status royal human beings. And then what happens is, to make the long story short, what happens is Sita is kidnapped by the Rakshasas, the demons, and the demons live down in Sri Lanka, and so they take Sita out to Sri Lanka. They take her far away. And the story of the Ramayana is Rama searching for his wife Sita, who's been kidnapped. And he has help. He has help from a couple friends. He has help from Garuda, who is the winged vulture god. And he flies Rama around. And then he also has help from Lakshman, who is his little brother, who's Rama's little brother. And Lakshman marries Sita's sister Ursmila, and so he helps out. And then he gets also help from another kind of popular god, Hanuman. And Hanuman is the monkey trickster god. Remember I talked about Jung, I talked about Coyote, the trickster in Native American tradition. Well, in Indian tradition, the trickster god is a monkey, Hanuman the monkey. Also in China, the trickster god archetype is a monkey. And so in Asia, you find the trickster as a monkey, because we know monkeys are playful and they're tricky. I'm sure you all read Curious George as a child, so you get that idea from Curious George. Hanuman is a kind of a trickster, and he is very, very instrumental in helping Rama. And in fact, what happens is Rama figures out that Sita is being held in Sri Lanka, and he goes down there off the coast of India, and then they have this battle between the gods and the demons to try to get Sita back. And while the gods are battling the demons, tricky monkey Hanuman sneaks in to the demon stronghold. He's able to sneak in because he's sneaky and tricky, and he gets in there and he's able to get Sita and bring her out. Okay, able to bring her out. And you think, okay, that's great. What a happy ending. They're reunited. The gods are victorious. They're reunited. Sita comes back, and that's in the story. And that's how, a lot of times when you see it in the West, that's how it's depicted, because we don't like the other part, the end of the story. The end of the story is, but I should tell you the real part of the story, the end of the story is that, Hindu society traditionally is very somewhat puritanical. And so Sita has been now kept captive by these demons for a long time. These demons aren't very nice. And it's assumed that she has probably been violated, or that she has allowed herself to be violated. That that maybe she was raped, but it's her fault, which to our modern way of thinking is really horrible, right? And so what happens is that Rama comes back and kind of shuns her a little bit when she's back, and then puts her on trial. Public trial. And she's very distraught about this. She's like, I only thought of you. I've been faithful to you, this whole time, at least in my mind. I've been faithful to you. And how could you put me on trial? And Rama's response is, well, I'm of divine heritage. I'm an incarnation of Vishnu. And so therefore, I can't just sweep it under the rug. We've got to bring this out in public. Everybody has to see it. And Sita is very upset by this, and she's crying, and she's basically says, if I'm innocent, then the earth will open and swallow me. Okay? And so what happens? He puts her on trial. She's crying. The earth opens up, and out of the earth comes an earth goddess. Here at the temple, you can see the statue of her, a very dark earth goddess, who rises out of the ground And the earth goddess's name is Bhudevi. And Bhudevi is Sita's mom. So you're ragging on my daughter, the mother-in-law comes in, how dare you, honey, you come home and live with me. Leave that horrible husband alone, right? And so what happens is Bhudevi embraces her daughter and goes back down into the earth, and the earth closes back up. And and Rama's like, oh my God, what have I done? I was so stupid of me, how could I have doubted my beautiful wife and, had cast aspersions on her. Oh, I miss her so much. And the other gods come down to Rama and say, not to worry, your time as being a human being is just about over. You're going to be reunited with her once you, go back and be a god again. And that's the story. So that's the sort of the real story of the Ramayana. Sometimes that part doesn't get depicted. I thought I'd mention that. All right. So that is Vishnu. So Vishnu also manifests in another form, which is very, very popular, and that is as the god Krishna. And so Vishnu and Rama and Sita really represent sort of like the prototype, the model of the older, established married couple. Okay, but in contradistinction to this, Krishna and his consort, his name is now blanking on me. It's like Krishna and let's talk about it at the temple the other day. Krishna and his consort represent the sort of archetype of the young couple. And Krishna is this god who is, you see pictures of him, again, he's usually depicted as blue. And again, the blue reflects the sky, which is thought to be infinite. So he's representing infinite. And he's often showed playing the flute. And he often goes down and hangs out with these cow herding maidens, these gopis, the gopis. And there he hangs out and he sort of sports with the gopis. And by that I mean he's, doing sort of naughty things that young people like to do with each other, and they have a lot of fun and they hang out together. But then one of the gopis, whose name is now going to drive me crazy, Radha. Sorry, thank you. Radha really catches his eye, and they become a couple, and they are the archetype of the young couple, Krishna and Radha. Okay? And they are very playful. They like to do fun things together. They do more things that like young people do. They sort of become the archetypal model of the young couple. Okay, and they're vastly beloved by Hindus. And there are sects or branches of Hinduism where they really consider to be that are almost in a way almost monotheistic, where they think of like the trinity of gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, as sort of just manifestations of the one true God. And Krishna in these sects is somehow almost akin to Jesus. He's almost God made human, right? And so you worship God through worshiping, the one God through worshiping Krishna. Okay? So Krishna takes on almost a little bit like Jesus. Okay, very similar to that. And there's some sects of Hinduism that are like that. And you guys may know these guys as the Hare Krishnas. They used to be in the airports all the time trying to convert people. Just chant Hare Krishna with me, all this kind of stuff. You guys may be too young to remember them. They used to, when I was in college, they were around at the college all the time, and they were trying to get recruits. And so they'd offer these free meals. They'd make these delicious South Indian meals, and they'd invite you for free. And all you had to do is, and then you get there and they go, oh, we're going to chant for a while, and then we're going to eat. And then you're chanting, and you have to chant for like an hour, and finally you get to eat, right? And the food was just absolutely delicious and very, very rich, very dairy-based. And you'd eat it, and you'd fall asleep afterward because it was so rich. And these guys were around all the time, and they were trying to convert people and get converts. In fact, I had a friend from college who was a big drug user, and then I don't know what happened to him, but finally ran into him years later after I graduated, and it turned out that he had joined the Krishnas, and that was what he was doing, and he was running some branch of their thing now and moved up in the organization. And they're still around. They're just a lot more quiet. I don't hear much about them anymore. But anyway, that's a branch of Hinduism that is kind of monotheistic. and they have Krishna as their main. But Krishna in general is very popular. People like, just like you guys like to watch TV. When you watch TV, you watch a romantic comedy, a rom-com TV show. A lot of the rom-coms are what? They're young couples. It's very common. There's an archetype to that. We're really attracted to that archetype. And again, Krishna sort of is the representation of that sort of thing in Hinduism. Okay, now I got to get Vishnu. Vishnu, move on a little bit. Sorry about that. I don't know why the slide, I got to figure out what's going on. That got lost. Okay, so let's talk about Vishnu's consort, Lakshmi. I talked to you about her in two forms, as Sita and as Radha. But as Lakshmi, she is also known as the goddess of wealth. Okay, the goddess of the hearth, of the resources. If you know Greek mythology, she's a little like Hera. She is usually shown in a red dress, a red sari, this, and with streams of coins coming from her hands. And it symbolizes not only prosperity, but also a harmonious family life. Of course, we know if you have money, and you're not always kind of worried about how you're supporting your family, that it's, you could be a little bit easier sometimes to be harmonious. She is extremely kind and soft-hearted, and she often helps out those who piss off her husband. Okay? So you piss off Vishnu, he's pissed at you, right? No, I don't know, I shouldn't have made him mad. You go to her, and she's very soft-hearted and kind. She will intercede to her husband and say, "Come on, dear, they're not so bad," and she'll help you out. Very kind, soft-hearted. She's similar in Christianity to Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary. Very similar in the sense that she intercedes with God on your behalf. So if you can't go directly to Vishnu because he's too high and mighty, he's too removed, you go to Lakshmi, and Lakshmi will help you. You pray to her, and she will convey your prayers to Vishnu. Again, showing that the female aspect of spirituality is the more active, right? Vishnu's just hanging out up there, whatever, but she makes the journey, she carries the message, she's doing the active bit here. Okay. All right, I think that's all I'm going to say about her. Also, you'll see these white elephants, very common. They're white elephant, these very common. These are also a symbol of fertility. Okay. And again, I will mention the phallic aspect of an elephant's trunk and its head. So that kind of makes sense. Also, she's shown with a red lotus. All right, now we can get to maybe perhaps the most interesting goddess, Parvati, who is Shiva's consort. And she is the mother of two kids. And we'll go back up here. She has two sons with Shiva, and Kartikeya, who's the god of war, which not much worshipped. Again, for a religion that emphasizes this idea of ahimsa, non-injury to beings, Kartikeya doesn't get much play. Okay? Her other son is Ganesha, who is immensely popular. Immensely popular. Did I talk to you guys about Ganesha already?
Yes.
I did. I told you the story about Ganesha, the Oedipal conflict. All right, okay. And again, this relates to this idea about Shiva and meditation. He doesn't like to be pissed off, and when he goes off to meditate, he sometimes doesn't know how long he's been meditating, and of course the story is that he comes home one day and he finds his wife Parvati with this grown man, and she's hugging this grown man, and he gets pissed off, and he grabs a knife and he cuts off this man's head, and Parvati's like, "What are you doing? You crazy?" And he's like, "Wait, you're here with another man?" She goes, "That's not another man, that's your son. You've been out meditating in the forest for 15 years. You realize that your son is grown up now, because you've got lost track of time because you're meditating so much." And then, of course, Shiva gets the head of an elephant and sticks it on the kid. and that's why he has the elephant head. So again, if you want your incestuous castration myth as the basis of your philosophy, the story of Ganesh fits that very well. Okay? Again, if Freud had been a Hindu, grew up in India, he could have developed his whole psychology from the story of Ganesh. Okay? And Ganesh is the god of knowledge, the remover of obstacles, also the provider of obstacles. Okay? So if you are going to go do something bad and somehow you just have a really hard time getting together to go rob that liquor store, everything seems to go wrong, your car runs out of gas, your friends flake on you, whatever, Ganesha may be placing obstacles in front of you to prevent you from doing that. Okay? But in general, Ganesha is the remover of obstacles, things that prevent you from doing good things. Ganesh shows up to remove those. And again, if you're in India and you go to a temple, you'll go to a temple, and typically in front of the Ganesha temple, there's lots of Ganesha temples, there'll be a bell, and you'll see young women lining up to ring the bell because they are asking Ganesh to remove the obstacles for them to have a baby. They want to get pregnant, they want to have a baby, go to the Ganesha temple, ring the bell, ask Ganesh to remove the obstacles to that. Okay? And last I saw, the population of India was probably a billion plus, so it seems like Ganesh is probably doing his job. But very popular. People really like Ganesh. I like Ganesh. He's one of my favorites. He does show up in Tibetan Buddhism. He's not super, you don't see him all the time in Tibetan Buddhism, but he does show up in Tibetan Buddhism. Brahma shows up in Tibetan Buddhism. He shows up in Tibetan Buddhism a little bit. Okay. I want to forget Ganesh, but I really like him. Let's go down, let's talk about Ganesh's mom, Parvati. Usually depicted in this peaceful form here. The legend is that she is a young girl in the mountains, and she practices intense austerities for many years in order to win Shiva as a husband. She swears not to move from her spot until Shiva agrees to marry her. Shiva does not want to marry her because he was already a widow. He had a previous wife whose name was Sati, who killed herself by jumping into a fire because she thought Shiva was a meditating forest bum. Basically, he just ignored her and would go off in the forest and meditate. And finally, she just got so fed up that she threw herself into a fire. Not a good match. As where Parvati, on the other hand, is into doing all these austerities in order to win Shiva's heart. Okay? And so Shiva doesn't want to get married. But Shiva was also very upset when Sati killed herself, and he would carry her body around with him, cutting off pieces as he went. And everywhere a piece fell, a sacred spot was established for Shiva worshippers. So if you go to India, there's all these sacred spots for Shiva worshippers. These are places where pieces of Sati's body have sort of fallen off. So Parvati is really, she does all these austerities. She won't move. Shiva decides to test her. She won't move, so he sends ants to attack her. He sends bad weather, all these kind of trials to get her to move. And finally, he manifests as a small child in the forest, far away crying. You guys know about this, right? When you hear a little child crying, very hard to resist this, especially, I think those who are mothers know about that child crying, that immediately gets your attention. And so Shiva decides to distract Parvati by in this small child in the forest. And so what happens is she can't resist helping it. So she gets up to go help the child. And the child turns into Shiva, demonstrating to Shiva that she would only give him up to help those who were powerless. And this makes Shiva change his mind. And again, this symbolically means that the way to Shiva, the way to experience God is through self-sacrifice and helping people who are helpless. And this is what we do as a Shivite. Now, remember I said the female principle is active, okay? And we have a name for this active female energy. It's called Shakti. Shakti. This is the female energy. And sometimes for Parvati, if she needs to get things done, she, especially if the task is a little bit tougher, she manifests in a more wrathful forms. Okay? And the first form, wrathful form, is Durga. And Durga is a warrior goddess. Okay, Durga is the warrior goddess. And she usually shown riding a lion or a tiger, and she's holding many, many weapons. You can look at these weapons here, and you can see these ancient Indian weapons. This is the mace thing, remember I told you about, where the top of it has a blade around it. She's got a sword here. I'm not quite sure what that one is. Can't quite see that. There's a conch shell, which you make the sound, and again, it's the primordial sound of God. And so you're announcing the spiritual presence. There's a bow and arrow. And then you've got, of course, because she's associated with Shiva, you have the trident. Okay. And then you also have lotus flowers here symbolizing purity. And again, she is doing this mudra, hand position. And this hand position is, hey, don't worry, I'm here, it's okay. Just like we would do, right? Kind of naturally do. You come into a situation, people are arguing or fighting, what do? Naturally go, hey, it's going to be okay. Separate here. That's what she's doing here. It's going to be okay, I'm going to take care of it. And you can see what happens is she shows up when there's some problems, especially she has to battle these demons. Now these demons here are personifications of sort of the 7 deadly sins, right? We typically think about these bad characteristics: hatred, greed, depression, sloth, conceit, ignorance, etc., etc., etc. Probably more than 7. Okay, and she shows up to deal with these. And again, this represents, in a way, also cleaning up your karma. Now she shows up to the battlefield. She's just sort of like regular warrior figure here. Okay, but you know this isn't going to handle the deal here. This is a tough battle. And what she does is she manifests in a really wrathful form like this. So this is her here, and you can just see she's going here, slicing and dicing, cutting off the heads of these demons, cutting off. Again, these characteristics are thought to be due to ignorance. So cutting off the head is, cutting off the ignorance. Right. So she's just taking care of business here, going through her in her real wrathful form. And you see her lion is getting in on the act too, right? So she's taking care of these demons. And that's Durga. Now, if the situation, yes?
The demons also be seen as individuals who've gone through having a lot of bad karma throughout their lives and going through
Yes,
bad
yes. And so in a way what she's doing is she's helping them clean their karma.
purification.
Yeah, she's cutting off the ignorance. And if you cut off ignorance, then you can start doing good karmic things. Right? Because the reason we do bad things is because we're ignorant. We don't realize, or we suppress the idea that doing these bad things has a consequence. Okay? And that's a profound form of ignorance. And so by cutting off the ignorance, by killing the demons, getting rid of the ignorance, you can't avoid the idea that there's a consequence for your deeds, for your bad deeds. Okay? So this is the way she helps cleanse the karma of people. Okay, but let's just say there's a situation where even Durga is not badass enough. In that case, Parvati manifests in this form, which is Kali. Okay. And Kali is really, really super wrathful. And you guys may know Kali, again, if you come from Irish background, you may know Kali through the name Kelly. Because it's thought that possibly the worship of Kali, the worship of this wrathful goddess, came out of India and went into the rest of the world, went up into Europe, and actually ended up in Celtic Ireland, where they knew about her as a wrathful goddess, and then supposedly the name Kelly is derived from Kali. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's something I read. Kali is often shown naked. Here, she's very dark in color. In fact, Kali means dark. Dark in color. She's wearing a necklace of severed heads or skulls. She has a belt of severed arms. She's holding a severed head. She's got this sickle-like thing that she cuts heads off with. She's also kind of doing this thing here. Witness that I'm taking care of business and it's going to be okay. She's often shown with this face where she's like making this face where she's eyes are bugging out and her tongue is hanging out. Okay. And notice down here, she is standing on the corpse of Shiva. Well, Shiva's he's basically dead. Down here, she's standing on top of him. Now, how many people here have done yoga? What do you do at the end of yoga? Once you've done all the exercise stuff, what do you do? You lay down there. What do they call this pose? Corpse pose, right? This is corpse pose. It has another name. It's called Shavasana. Shiva asana. Asana means pose. Shiva's pose, right? This is Shavasana. Lying there dead, and Shakti is doing all the active stuff. So Shiva lies there dead doing nothing, and Kali doing all the work. Okay? So when you do yoga, this is where Shavasana is coming from. This is what you're doing. Now, this is the rated G version of Shavasana. Because in many other versions, depictions of this, Shiva's also doing something else. Let's just say all of Shiva is relaxed except one part. And you're going to see that in a minute. Remember I warned you in the syllabus? I gave you trigger warnings about sexual imagery, so here it's coming up. If it's going to bug you, just take off. I'll show you some stuff there. There's another version of this. You can see this more clearly. Again, Shiva is doing nothing. He has his trident here and his damaru down here, possibly symbolic. And here you have naked, almost naked Kali on top with the necklace of severed heads. Now, the severed heads, again, cutting off ignorance. Okay, cutting off ignorance. Cutting off ego. Our ego's in our head, right? You know, this is psychologists. And so we want to cut that off. Selfishness, egotisticalness, we cut that off. You notice the hands are red. Blood. Remember when I told you I went to the Kali temple of Nepal? Goat sacrifice. Blood all over the place. Take the little kid's hands, dip it in the blood, and then go and take the little kids and wipe their hands on the statue of Kali, which was set into the wall for good luck. Okay? Blood on the hands. Right? Take them the face. Now, I should mention that there are, Parvati is interesting to me because she has 10 real incarnations. 10 plus. But she also manifests as what they call the Dasha Mahavidyas. Dasha Mahavidyas. These are the 10 wisdom goddesses, sometimes referred to as the 10 emanations of Parvati. And the story of this goes like this, that once during their numerous love games, things got out of hand between Shiva and Parvati. What started out in jest turned into a serious matter with a pissed off Shiva threatening to walk out on Parvati. You guys may know about this. You are with your partner doing something romantic, but somehow it morphs into a fight. Hopefully none of you have ever experienced that, but if you've been in a relationship any length of time, you may have experienced this. And no amounting of coaxing or cajoling by Parvati could reverse matters. Left with no choice, Parvati multiplies herself into 10 different forms for each of the 10 directions. Thus, however hard Shiva might try to escape from her, he would find her standing as a guardian, guarding all the escape routes. The specter of these 10 goddesses covers the whole range of feminine divinity, encompassing horrific goddesses at one end to the ravishingly beautiful at the other. And there's 10 of these, which we'll talk about some of them, not all, I don't think. Kali, Tara, who is we're going to see again in Tibetan Buddhism. Shodashi, who is the young girl goddess. She's the 16-year-old beautiful female goddess. Bhuvanaswari, the creator of the world. Again, we know Brahma's the creator, but we also have this version that also is thought as the creator. Chinnamasta, the goddess who cuts off her own head. Bhairavi, the goddess of decay. Dhumawati, the goddess, the widow goddess. Bagalamukti, the goddess who seizes the tongue. Matangi, the goddess who loves pollution. And Kamala, the last but not the least, Kamala is the goddess of love. Now Kali is mentioned the first among these, okay, these Mahavijas. And that's her. And Kali is widely worshipped. probably not quite as popular as some of the other Hindu gods, but again, is somebody who gets things done. She's very important. And then we do have Kali worshippers here in the States. There's people who, Kali temples and things like that even here. Tara is very important. Okay? Tara is a version of Kali, a version of Parvati of Kali. Very similar. Iconography is very similar. Very similar deal here. She's compassionate. But look at this. She is cutting off heads. She's got scissors, right? She's got a big thing. She's actually, the snake is actually in her mouth. Not quite sure what that is. And again, she's got the arms and the heads here. So very similar to Kali in Hinduism. But she's known for her compassion. So again, this idea that you're cutting off ignorance is a compassion. It's a kind of a tough love compassion. It's a form of tough love. Okay? Notice, she's also standing on the corpse of Shiva. But notice that Shiva and his consort, I assume this is Parvati here, are engaged in a sexual act. And you can't see it close here, because if you go close to this picture, you can see that this indeed, they are right in the middle of doing the nasty. Okay? And again here, there's an idea that you take this energy generated by sexual congress, and you're able to elevate that into, you're able to transmute that, elevate that into compassion. That again, the sexual energy, these drives, these basic drives we had. Remember Freud? Remember why? This is one of the reasons why I talked about Freud at the beginning of the class. We had Freud, Eros and Thanatos, right? These basic human drives, and again, you can see plenty of Eros and Thanatos here, right, in this picture. These basic human drives are being used for spiritual purpose, to cut off ignorance and to help people. Okay? Because again, cutting off ignorance, cutting off egotisticalness will help people. Okay? So it's a form of compassion. So Tara emphasizes that compassionate form. And again, you see also down here that there's flame. You can't see too clearly from where you are, but there's flames around here. So this hot passion is being transmuted into a spiritual purpose. A spiritual purpose which is very active, getting things done. There's also another symbolism of this as well, that you can think about this in terms of the chakra system, right? The chakra system are these energy centers in the body, right? And they go from low to high. And again, the higher ones are more concerned with spirituality, and the lower ones are concerned more about base human things like sex. And the idea is you're taking this chakra into the lower energy and you're moving it up the chakras toward the spiritual centers, okay, in an active way. And so this picture is showing you. And one of my favorite images is this one. This is Chinnamasta. Chinnamasta is really interesting here. And Chinnamasta is a version of Parvati, again, that becomes somewhat wrathful. And the version is this. Okay? One day, Parvati goes to bathe in the river with her two attendants. Her attendants are named Jaya and Vijaya. And after bathing, the great goddess's color becomes darker because she is sexually aroused. So a lot of times you'll see when these goddesses are darker, this is representing passion or sexual arousal. So she becomes sexually aroused. She has a nice bath, And so she's basically taking her bath, kind of hanging out, getting a little aroused, or maybe possibly taking care of business. But she hears her two attendants, who are like her children, saying, "Give me food, we are hungry." Right? Anybody here have kids? Your kids ever interrupt you? When you're doing something, you don't want to be interrupted, and your kids are like, we're hungry, yeah. And you say, come back later, Mommy's having a nap, right? No, right? 2 seconds later, Mommy, we're hungry, feed us, right? You can't ever get things. Kids are always bugging. Give us food, we're hungry. And Parvati replies, I'll give you food, but you need to wait a little while. Mommy's busy. Okay? After a while again, we're hungry, please, feed us. She's like, you need to wait, I'm thinking about some stuff right now. Okay? And a couple minutes later, Mommy, we're hungry, please feed us. You are the mother of the universe. A child asks everything from her mother. The mother gives her children not only food, but also coverings for her body, everything. That is why we're praying to you for food. You are known for your mercy. Please feed us. And so finally, Parvati's like, what can I do? I got to feed these kids. So, hearing this, she says, look, I'll give you anything when you get home. You can have candy and pizza for dinner. Just leave me alone for a few more minutes, right? Okay? But we're overpowered with hunger. O Mother of the Universe, give us food so we may be satisfied. O Merciful One, bestower of boons and fulfiller of desires. They call out to her. And hearing this, Parvati smiles and says, okay, I'll feed you now. And she does this by severing her own head, and these streams of blood come out, and they go to her attendants here, and actually one also goes to her severed head. And in the left, and after performing this, they're all satisfied, and they return home. Wow, what does this mean? Okay. Well, let's think about this for a second. Take a look at this picture. My favorite Hindu images. Okay. I think of this, these attendants as sort of yin and yang, or we'll talk about yin and yang later, but sort of light and dark. They represent sort of the basic duality in the world, basic archetype of duality. And what's she doing here? Well, first of all, here we have the couple. Here's Shiva. I mean, this is a version of Shiva. And the version of Shiva here on the bottom is this is a couple, Kama Deva. Kama means love, so she is the demigoddess of love. And this version of Shiva is called he's Kami Deva. He's the demigoddess of love here, Shiva. And the woman here is Rati. Okay, and again, they're here lying on a lotus, and they are, again, I don't know if you can see this up close, but they are actively, this is like they're in a porno, basically. And they are actively doing it here. Again, Shiva on the bottom ain't doing much. He's just lying there. Only one part of him is active. Okay, only one part of him is standing at attention. She's doing all the work, and then on top of them is the naked body of Parvati, dark. Her legs are spread open. Okay. Those of you who do yoga, you may have maybe done goddess pose. Okay, this is a version of goddess pose, by the way. What does this symbolize? Other than it just looks like this, you want the porno music to start playing, right? No, that's not what this is about. It's not about sexuality. It's not a prurient picture. And a Hindu seeing this picture does not see this as having sexual content. This is symbolic. And what is it symbolic of? Is that, again, you have Eros and Thanatos, you have this male, female energy coming together down here. And again, the idea is that you take this energy that's created through sexual passion, and you are able to bring it up through the chakras, up and transmute it into something that is more spiritual. Well, what is spiritual about cutting off these heads and feeding people this bloodstream, right? Doesn't seem very spiritual, but it is spiritual. Because again, what you're doing is you're cutting off ignorance, you're cutting off egotisticalness. You are giving everything. This is a radical form of compassion. Okay? Radical compassion. Yes? Say it louder.
You can say it's a way of delayed gratification.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It's a form of delayed gratification that you are transmuting the energy, sublimation, if you will, if you want to use a Freudian term. Sublimation. Yes.
Is there a reason why Shiva's not with Parvati?
They're all versions of Shiva and Parvati.
Oh.
So this is, I'd assume that this Rati is another version of Parvati. I assume so. Maybe she's somebody else. It doesn't matter. Symbolically, it doesn't matter. But the idea is that the energy is coming up, and the energy of compassion for these two attendants, right? They're hungry, and her energy of compassion for all beings, is to feed them with this, with basically the source of her body, okay, everything, and then again, and this results in the cutting off of ignorance. Yes. Go ahead.
Is she not sexually aroused anymore?
Is what?
Is she not sexually aroused anymore?
Well, again, it's symbolically. Yes, she is sexually aroused. But, at the end, she has to go home and, feed the kids, so puts it off till later. But, that's not important. What's important is the sexual energy gets transmuted, okay, into a spiritual purpose. that you can take Eros and Thanatos. This is very opposite of Freud, right? Remember I talked about Freud. Freud talks about the sexual energy and the aggressive energy, Eros and Thanatos, that we suppress this and we're able to sublimate it, but because of that, we're always really super miserable, right? So we have a great civilization, we build buildings and do all these things, but we're these miserable beings, In Hinduism, the story has a little bit of a different ending, that we're able to sublimate this sexual energy, these drives, and by doing that, we're able to actually manifest in a more spiritual, more compassionate way. Okay? So this is like Freudian psychology with a nice ending, right? So not so misogynist and misanthropic as Freud. This is a nice ending. I mean, the idea that you can do this, you can take care of people. That if you sublimate this energy, if you delay gratification, if you transmute this passion energy from just immediately dealing with it, then you can actually transmute it into cutting off ignorance, getting your karma together by doing that, right? And you're able then to be compassionate toward others. You take care of others. So that's what this symbol really represents. That makes sense? I think it's I love this picture. I looked at it. It's amazing. Okay. We're going to see more of this kind of thing a little bit when we get to Tibetan Buddhism. We're going to see, again, a very similar idea. And again, the Tibetan Buddhists probably Buddhism in India at the late part of Buddhism's development in India was highly influenced by Hinduism, and especially the sort of this type of tantric Hinduism with this system of chakras and things like that, which we're not going to have a lot of time to get into in this semester, but there's a lot more to Hinduism than we're getting to in this class. So you realize that. Okay? I'm not going to go into detail about the chakras. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the chakras when we get to Tibetan Buddhism. Because it's basically just taken from Hinduism. But this is what this symbolizes here. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about Hinduism proper. Any questions on anything here? I know there's a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, and it's just a little bit of an overview. Okay, we're just skimming the surface still. All right. So why don't we take a break for 10 minutes, and then I'll come back and I'm going to talk about sadhus.